I'm your only child, Mom. Everything you have belongs to me anyway, Michael declared with a kind of cold calculation that made my blood freeze. His words bounced off the sterile walls of the family court in Chicago, Illinois, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. The arrogance in his voice was suffocating, but I sat perfectly still in my chair, my weathered hands folded in my lap, refusing to let him see how much his betrayal was destroying me from the inside. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 70 years old, and I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own flesh and blood would drag me into court, trying to steal every penny I'd saved over 5 decades of hard work. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across the courtroom, making everything feel surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table with his slick attorney, a man who probably charged more per hour than I used to make in a month working double shifts at the textile factory. My son looked nothing like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort in his mother's arms. This Michael wore a $1,000 suit, one he certainly couldn't afford on his part-time bartender salary, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. His green eyes, once so full of wonder and love, now held nothing but greed and entitlement. Your Honor, Michael's lawyer continued, his voice smooth as silk, my client has been financially supporting his elderly mother for years, and according to Illinois law, he has a rightful claim to her assets as her primary caregiver and only heir. I watched the gallery behind us, filled with curious onlookers who'd probably never seen a case quite like this. An elderly mother being sued by her own son. It was the kind of story that would spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some faces showed sympathy, others displayed the morbid fascination people have with family drama that isn't their own. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Williams, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the stack of papers before her. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen it all in her courtroom, do you understand the nature of your son's claim against you? I stood slowly, my arthritis making every movement deliberate and painful. Yes, Your Honor, I understand perfectly. My son believes he's entitled to my life savings, my house, and everything I've worked for since I was 16 years old. The irony wasn't lost on me. 54 years ago, I'd started working at Miller Textiles, making barely enough to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads after Michael's father abandoned us when Michael was just 2 years old. I remembered those early days so vividly. Coming home with bleeding fingers from the sewing machines, exhausted but determined to give my son a better life than I'd had. Mrs. Thompson, the judge continued, your son's attorney has presented documentation suggesting you're no longer capable of managing your own finances due to your age and alleged cognitive decline. How do you respond to these allegations? My heart pounded as I looked directly at Michael. Your Honor, I may be 70 years old, but my mind is as sharp as it was the day I first held my son in my arms. I've been managing my own finances longer than some of these lawyers have been alive, and I've never missed a payment, never bounced a check, and never made a financial decision I've regretted. Michael's attorney smirked, clearly unimpressed by my response. Your Honor, we have medical records suggesting Mrs. Thompson has been experiencing memory issues and confusion. Just last month, she forgot to pay her utility bill, and my client had to intervene to prevent her electricity from being shut off. The lie hit me like a physical blow. I had never forgotten to pay a bill in my entire adult life. But as I glanced at Michael, I saw the truth in his eyes. He'd orchestrated this whole scenario, probably by intercepting my mail or somehow preventing the payment from going through. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, was now lying in open court to steal from me. Furthermore, the attorney continued, pulling out a thick folder, we have evidence that Mrs. Thompson has been the victim of various scams targeting the elderly. She's made several large withdrawals from her savings account in recent months, which my client believes were the result of her diminished capacity to make sound financial decisions. Another lie, but this one was more sophisticated. Yes, I had made large withdrawals to pay for Michael's rent when he was evicted from his apartment, to cover his credit card debts, and to help him through what he claimed were temporary financial difficulties. Every withdrawal had been at his request, usually accompanied by promises that he'd pay me back once he got back on his feet. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Judge Williams studied the documents Michael's attorney had submitted, occasionally glancing up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Skepticism? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty terrified me more than anything else. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Williams said finally, do you have legal representation? I looked down at my hands, gnarled from decades of factory work. No, Your Honor. I couldn't afford an attorney. What I didn't say was that Michael had convinced me I didn't need one, that this was just a formality to protect both of us, that he loved me and would never really take everything from me. Even now, part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could make sense of this nightmare. The court will appoint a public defender to represent you, Judge Williams announced. We'll recess for 30 minutes to allow you to consult with your counsel. As the judge's gavel fell, I remained seated, watching Michael stand and stretch like he was at a coffee shop rather than in the process of destroying his mother's life. He didn't even glance in my direction as he walked out of the courtroom with his attorney, probably to celebrate their apparent victory. The public defender assigned to me was a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, barely out of law school by the look of her. She sat down beside me with a kind smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes as she flipped through the case file. Mrs. Thompson, she said gently, I have to be honest with you. Your son's case is quite strong from a legal standpoint. If the court determines that you're not capable of managing your finances, they could appoint a conservator, most likely your son, as your next of kin. But I am capable, I insisted, my voice stronger than I felt. I've been managing just fine on my own. Every penny in my savings account came from my own hard work. Sarah nodded sympathetically. I believe you, but we need to prove it to the judge. Can you tell me about these large withdrawals? The prosecution is claiming they're evidence of poor judgment. I took a deep breath and told her the truth. Every loan I'd given Michael, every crisis I'd helped him through, every time I'd chosen to believe his promises over my own instincts. As I spoke, I saw Sarah's expression change from professional sympathy to something closer to anger. Mrs. Thompson, she said slowly, it sounds like your son has been financially exploiting you for months, maybe years. These weren't bad financial decisions on your part. They were manipulative tactics used against you. The words hung in the air between us like a diagnosis I didn't want to accept. My son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the toddler I'd taught to tie his shoes, the teenager I'd stayed up nights worrying about. He hadn't been asking for help. He'd been stealing from me, slowly and methodically, preparing for this moment when he could take everything at once. What do we do now? I asked, feeling older than my 70 years. Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying something in the case file. Mrs. Thompson, do you have any documentation of these loans to your son? Bank statements, text messages, anything that might show the real reason for these withdrawals? I thought about my purse, sitting on the defendant's table. Inside was my phone, filled with text messages from Michael begging for help, promising to pay me back, declaring his love and gratitude. I'd saved every one, the way mothers save their children's artwork. Proof of our relationship, evidence of his need for me. I have text messages, I said quietly. Lots of them. That's a start, Sarah replied, making notes. What else? Do you have any other evidence that might help us show the court that you're competent and that your son has been manipulating you? I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, worn leather that had been with me for over a decade. Tucked behind my driver's license was a photograph I always carried with me, one that had gotten me through many difficult days. But as I looked at it now, I realized it might serve a very different purpose than I'd ever imagined. I have this, I said, handing Sarah the photo. She looked at it, and I watched her eyes widen. Mrs. Thompson, when was this taken? 3 months ago, I replied. At Michael's birthday party. Sarah studied the photo more carefully, then looked at me with something approaching amazement. Mrs. Thompson, this might be exactly what we need. As the recess ended and we filed back into the courtroom, I clutched that photograph in my hand like a lifeline. Michael took his seat at the plaintiff's table, still radiating confidence, still convinced he'd outmaneuvered his elderly mother. He had no idea what was coming. Judge Williams called the court to order, and Michael's attorney immediately resumed his attack on my competency. Your Honor, I'd like to call my client to the stand to testify about his mother's declining mental state and his efforts to care for her. Michael stood and walked to the witness stand with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. As he was sworn in, I noticed he still wouldn't look at me directly. Perhaps some small part of him still felt shame for what he was doing. Mr. Thompson, his attorney began, can you describe your mother's recent behavior and your concerns about her ability to manage her finances? Michael cleared his throat and put on what I recognized as his sincere voice. The same tone he'd used when he was 7 years old and trying to convince me he hadn't broken my favorite vase. Your Honor, he said, looking directly at the judge, I love my mother dearly, but she's not the same person she used to be. She forgets things, makes impulsive decisions, and I'm worried that people are taking advantage of her. Just last month, she gave $5,000 to some telemarketer who called claiming to be from a charity. When I tried to explain it was probably a scam, she became angry and defensive. Another lie, delivered with such conviction that I almost doubted my own memory for a moment. The $5,000 had been for his car repairs. Or at least, that's what he told me when he'd begged me for the money with tears in his eyes. I've had to step in multiple times to help her with basic things, Michael continued, his voice taking on a tone of long-suffering patience. Paying bills, grocery shopping, managing her medications. She tries to maintain her independence, but it's becoming dangerous for her to live alone. I wanted to stand up and scream that it was all lies, that the only danger in my life was him, but Sarah placed a gentle hand on my arm, reminding me to wait for our turn. Mr. Thompson, his attorney asked, in your opinion, would your mother benefit from having a conservator to help manage her affairs? Michael nodded sadly, as if the idea pained him. I think it would be the best thing for her, yes. I don't want to see her taken advantage of anymore. And I certainly don't want her to end up losing everything she's worked for because she's no longer able to make sound financial decisions. The performance was flawless, and I could see some of the spectators in the gallery nodding along sympathetically. Here was a devoted son, trying to protect his aging mother from her own declining capabilities. If I didn't know the truth, I might have been moved by his apparent concern. But I did know the truth, and more importantly, I had proof. Your Honor, Sarah said as she stood for cross-examination, I have just a few questions for Mr. Thompson. Michael shifted slightly in his chair, but his confident smile never wavered. He still thought this was going according to his plan. Mr. Thompson, Sarah began, you testified that you've been financially supporting your mother and helping her manage her affairs. Can you tell the court exactly how much financial support you've provided to her over the past year? The question caught Michael off guard. I watched him hesitate for the first time since this nightmare began. Well, I help her with various expenses when she needs it. That's not what I asked, Sarah pressed. I asked for a specific dollar amount. How much money have you given to your mother in the past 12 months? Michael's attorney started to object, but Judge Williams waved him off. The witness will answer the question. I don't keep track of exact amounts, Michael said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. It's not about money. I help her because I love her. Sarah nodded as if this was exactly the answer she'd expected. I see. So you don't have any bank statements, canceled checks, or other documentation showing money flowing from your accounts to your mother's accounts? No, Most of our arrangements are informal. Informal, Sarah repeated. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, has very detailed records of money flowing in the opposite direction. Would you like to see them? Michael's face had gone pale, and I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. This wasn't going according to his script. Sarah walked to our table and picked up a stack of bank statements I'd provided during our brief consultation. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Mrs. Thompson's bank statements from the past 18 months, which show a clear pattern of large withdrawals, all corresponding to requests for financial assistance from her son. Objection, Michael's attorney called out. This is irrelevant to the question of Mrs. Thompson's competency. On the contrary, Sarah replied smoothly, it goes directly to the question of who has been financially supporting whom, and whether Mrs. Thompson's financial decisions were the result of diminished capacity or familial obligation. Judge Williams examined the bank statements, her expression growing more serious with each page. Mr. Thompson, she said, looking up at my son, these records show your mother withdrew $15,000 in cash over the past 6 months. Do you have any knowledge of these withdrawals? Michael squirmed in his seat. Some of that money. Yes, my mother occasionally helps me out when I'm between jobs. Occasionally, Sarah repeated. According to these records, your mother has given you over $43,000 in the past 18 months. Does that sound occasional to you? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. $43,000. I hadn't realized it was that much until Sarah had added it all up. Seeing the total written down in black and white made the scope of Michael's manipulation crystal clear. Mr. Thompson, Sarah continued relentlessly, you testified that your mother made poor financial decisions and gave money to scammers. But according to these records, the vast majority of her withdrawals went directly to helping you. Were you scamming your mother? Objection, Michael's attorney shouted, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air, and everyone in that courtroom was thinking the same thing I was. The only person who had been taking advantage of me was my own son. I'll allow it, Judge Williams said. Mr. Thompson, please answer the question. Michael looked trapped, his eyes darting between his attorney, the judge, and finally, reluctantly, to me. For a moment, I saw something in his face that reminded me of the little boy he used to be, caught red-handed with cookie crumbs on his shirt. I always intended to pay her back, he said quietly. But you never did you? Sarah asked. In fact, instead of paying her back, you decided to sue her for everything she has left. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael seemed to shrink in his chair, the confident facade crumbling before our eyes. Mr. Thompson, Sarah said, you've painted a picture of yourself as a caring son protecting his incompetent mother. But the evidence suggests something quite different. It suggests that you've been systematically draining your mother's savings for over a year, and when she started to resist, you decided to take legal action to gain control of her remaining assets. That's not true, Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah turned to Judge Williams. Your Honor, I believe the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Thompson is not only mentally competent, but has been the victim of financial elder abuse by her own son. I'd like to call Mrs. Thompson to testify on her own behalf. As I made my way to the witness stand, I felt every eye in the courtroom on me. My legs were shaky, whether from nerves or arthritis I couldn't tell, but I was determined to have my say. After being sworn in, I looked out at the faces watching me. Some sympathetic, some curious, some openly hostile. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah began gently, can you tell the court about your relationship with your son over the past few years? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Michael is my only child. His father left when Michael was very young, so it was just the two of us for most of his childhood. I worked 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed. Food, clothes, school supplies, money for activities with his friends. My voice grew stronger as I continued. I put myself through night school to become a bookkeeper because I wanted to provide better for him. I saved every penny I could so that Michael could go to college without student loans. I wanted to give him opportunities one never had. Did Michael go to college? Sarah asked. He dropped out after 2 years, I replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. He said it wasn't for him, that he wanted to find his own path. I supported his decision because I wanted him to be happy. When did Michael first ask you for financial help as an adult? I thought back to those early requests, how innocent they had seemed at the time. About 3 years ago, he said he was short on rent and just needed a small loan to get through the month. He promised he'd pay me back when he got his next paycheck. And did he pay you back? No, I admitted quietly. There was always some reason why he couldn't. He got fewer hours at work, his car broke down, he had unexpected expenses. And I believed him because he's my son and I love him. Sarah nodded encouragingly. Mrs. Thompson, your son testified that you've been forgetting things and making poor financial decisions. Can you respond to those allegations? I have never been sharper in my life, I said firmly. I balance my checkbook to the penny every month. I know exactly how much money I have and where every dollar goes. The only poor financial decision I've made was continuing to believe my son when he said he would pay me back. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah said, I'm going to show you some text messages that were downloaded from your phone. Can you identify these? She handed me a stack of printed messages, and as I read through them, I felt my heart break all over again. Message after message from Michael, each one more desperate than the last. Mom, I'm going to be evicted if I don't get $800 by tomorrow. Please, I'll pay you back next week, I promise. I know I still owe you from last time, but my car died and I need it for work. Can you help me out? Just $1,200 for repairs. Mom, I hate asking, but I'm in real trouble. I owe some people money and they're not the kind of people you want to owe. $3,000 would get me out of this mess. I swear on Dad's grave I'll pay you back. Each message was followed by my responses. Loving, concerned, always agreeing to help. Reading them now, I could see the pattern Sarah was highlighting. Every request was an emergency. Every promise was broken. Every amount was a little bit more than the last time. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah asked gently, were these the actions of someone with diminished mental capacity, or were they the actions of a mother who loves her son? I looked directly at Michael for the first time since this ordeal began. I gave you that money because I love you, I said, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Every single dollar came from a place of love and concern for your well-being. I never asked for anything in return except honesty, and you couldn't even give me that. Michael's head was down, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. For a moment, I wondered if he was crying, if some part of him still felt remorse for what he was putting me through. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah continued, do you feel you're capable of managing your own finances? I managed to save over $200,000 working in a textile factory and as a part-time bookkeeper, I replied. I managed to pay off my house early and build a retirement fund that would have lasted me the rest of my life if my son hadn't spent the last year draining it. I think that speaks to my capability. Sarah walked over to our table and picked up the photograph I'd shown her during our consultation. Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to show you a photograph and ask you to identify it for the court. She handed me the picture, and I smiled despite everything that was happening. It was from Michael's 30th birthday party 3 months ago, taken at the expensive restaurant he'd chosen for the celebration. The one I'd paid for, of course. This is a photograph from my son's birthday party, I said. It was taken at Romano's, that fancy Italian place downtown. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah asked, who paid for this birthday party? I did, I replied. The dinner cost over $400 for Michael and his friends. Sarah took the photograph from me and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to enter this photograph into evidence and direct the court's attention to a particular detail. Judge Williams examined the photograph closely, adjusting her glasses. After a moment, her expression changed completely. Mrs. Thompson, the judge said, can you explain what we're seeing in this photograph? I knew exactly what she was looking at. The detail that had made Sarah's eyes widen when she first saw the picture. Your Honor, that's my son Michael, and those are his friends celebrating his birthday. If you look closely at the table, you can see several expensive bottles of champagne and what appears to be some recreational drugs. The courtroom exploded in murmurs and gasps. Michael's head snapped up. his face a mask of panic as he realized what photograph we were discussing. Furthermore, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, you can see that Michael is clearly under the influence of something in this picture. His eyes are dilated, and he's making gestures that suggest he's not sober. Sarah approached Michael's attorney's table. Your Honor, this photograph was taken just 3 months ago, during the same time period when Mr. Thompson claims his mother was becoming increasingly incompetent and making poor financial decisions. I'd like to ask Mr. Thompson to explain how he was able to afford such an expensive celebration, complete with illegal substances, while simultaneously claiming to be financially supporting his elderly mother. Michael's attorney was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly caught completely off guard. Your Honor, this photograph is highly prejudicial and irrelevant to. On the contrary, Judge Williams interrupted, this photograph is extremely relevant. Mr. Thompson, would you like to explain what I'm seeing in this evidence? Michael stared at the photograph in horror. He'd been so drunk and high that night that he probably didn't even remember the picture being taken, let alone what it might reveal about his lifestyle and his lies. That's not. It was my birthday. He stammered. Mr. Thompson, Judge Williams said sternly, this court takes a very dim view of perjury. You've testified under oath that you've been financially supporting your mother and that you're concerned about her welfare. But this photograph, combined with the bank records showing a clear pattern of you receiving money from your mother, suggests that your testimony has been false. Sarah returned to the podium. Your Honor, I believe this photograph clearly demonstrates several crucial facts. First, that Mrs. Thompson is mentally competent enough to operate a smartphone camera and preserve evidence. Second, that Mr. Thompson has been living a lifestyle far beyond his stated means, funded by his mother's savings. And third, that his claims of being a caring son are contradicted by his willingness to engage in illegal activities while asking his mother to pay for his expenses. The judge studied the photograph again, her expression growing more stern by the minute. Mrs. Thompson, she said, why did you take this photograph? Because it was my son's birthday, I replied simply. Despite everything, I love him and I wanted to commemorate the occasion. I take pictures at every family gathering, every holiday, every important moment. It's what mothers do. Judge Williams set the photograph down and looked directly at Michael. Mr. Thompson, given this new evidence, do you wish to revise any of your previous testimony? Michael looked like a cornered animal. His expensive suit was wrinkled now, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. The confident man who had walked into this courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who looked very much like the scared little boy I remembered. He started, then stopped. I think I need to speak with my attorney. You'll have that opportunity, Judge Williams replied coldly. But first, I want to address the fundamental question before this court. Mr. Thompson, you came here today asking me to declare your mother incompetent and grant you conservatorship over her assets. Based on the evidence presented, I find your request not only groundless but deeply troubling. The judge's words hit Michael like physical blows. I could see him shrinking in his chair with each sentence. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Williams continued, turning to me, the evidence clearly shows that you are mentally competent, financially savvy, and have been the victim of what appears to be systematic financial abuse by your son. Not only is his petition denied, but I am ordering him to repay every dollar he has taken from you over the past 18 months. The courtroom erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was watching Michael's face as the reality of the situation finally hit him. He hadn't just lost his attempt to steal my savings. He was now legally obligated to pay back everything he'd already taken. Furthermore, Judge Williams announced, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges related to elder abuse and perjury. Michael's attorney was whispering urgently in his ear, but Michael seemed to have gone into shock. The master plan he'd thought was foolproof had not just failed. It had completely backfired. As the judge's gavel fell and the court session ended, I remained seated for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah was gathering her papers, smiling broadly, but I felt strangely empty. Yes, I had won. Yes, my life savings were safe. But I had also lost something precious that I would never get back. The relationship with my son. Michael finally looked at me as he stood to leave. For just a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been remorse, or perhaps just fear of the consequences he was now facing. But it was too little, too late. As he walked past my table, he paused for just a second. "Mom," he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. "I'm sorry." I looked up at him, this stranger who had once been my whole world. "I know you are, Michael," I replied softly. "But sorry doesn't give me back the son I thought I had." He stood there for another moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but then his attorney pulled him away toward the exit. I watched him go, remembering the little boy who used to run to me whenever he was hurt or scared, knowing that boy was gone forever. Sarah sat down beside me as the courtroom emptied. "Mrs. Thompson, you should be proud of yourself. You stood up to him and won." I nodded, clutching the photograph that had saved my financial future. "I won," I agreed, "but I'm not sure it feels like a victory." As we walked out of the courthouse together, I thought about the road ahead. Michael would have to pay me back, assuming he could find a way to do it. There might be criminal charges. Our relationship was probably over forever. But I also thought about the other things that photograph represented. My independence, my dignity, and my refusal to be a victim. At 70 years old, I had proven that I was still capable of fighting for myself, even when the fight was against the person I loved most in the world. The afternoon sun was bright as we stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. My life savings were safe, my home was secure, and my future was my own to determine. Michael had tried to steal my life, but in the end, all he'd managed to steal was his place in it.